Hello everyone, back to the latest Star Wars video. So I'm going to give you a more detailed review of The Rise of Skywalker. I saw it yesterday at the View in Northampton, and I did some preliminary thoughts about it in a video that I uploaded to the channel yesterday evening. But I'll give you a more sort of detailed view about The Rise of Skywalker for this video. It will contain spoilers, so if you haven't seen The Rise of Skywalker yet, then please click away. You don't want to be spoiled. Please click away now and come back when you've seen the film and let me know what you think in the comments, of course. But from now onwards, we will be giving spoilers for The Rise of Skywalker, so if you don't want to be spoiled, then please don't watch the video. For everybody else that has seen The Rise of Skywalker or doesn't care about being spoiled, then here we go. So, just say if you're enjoying my style of content on my channel, then please like, share and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you thought to The Rise of Skywalker. Right, so, as I said in yesterday's preliminary thoughts video, The Rise of Skywalker is very mixed. There are a lot of problems with this film. I wasn't terribly keen on The Rise of Skywalker at all. I think it's definitely the best of the sequel trilogy. That's not saying much, because The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, I didn't like those two films either. This one at least feels like Star Wars, so they do get several aspects of this one right, and so it does have its good points. But there are a lot of problems with The Rise of Skywalker, and overall, I'm negative about it. Overall, I didn't particularly like it. I didn't particularly care for it. And I'll go over some of the reasons for that in a moment. But the good points about it are that it undoes most of what happened in The Last Jedi. So if you didn't like The Last Jedi, then at least it does undo most of what happens in The Last Jedi, and there are lots of different ways that they go about doing that, but they fix Luke's character in The Rise of Skywalker. So Luke only has a very small role, though, because of course he was killed off in The Last Jedi, so he comes back as a Force ghost. There's nothing anybody can do about that. That was the failure of Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy to not keep Luke alive for this third and final movie. So there's nothing director J.J. Abrams could do about the fact that Luke is dead, and he's got to work with what he's got to work with. So he does his best here. Luke has a couple of really nice scenes with Rey. So the first one, she throws away the lightsaber, the Skywalker Legacy lightsaber. She throws it away. Luke catches it and gives it back to her. That's J.J. Abrams sort of thumbing his nose at Rian Johnson, who had Luke throw the lightsaber away like a piece of trash in his opening scene of The Last Jedi. So that aspect of Luke is fixed. Luke is much more like the Luke we know from the original trilogy. In The Rise of Skywalker, Mark Hamill plays a character that he knows. We didn't know the character he was playing in The Last Jedi, and that's very, very evident by what he said after The Last Jedi was released. In this one, he knows the character he's playing, and he plays that character very well. He also lifts the X-Wing out of the water. I know that is something that a lot of fans wanted to see Luke do in The Last Jedi. He does it in this, even though he's a Force ghost. And this does go a little bit against the lore of Star Wars, and it's something they have done with these sequel trilogy films. Remember, Yoda was able to conjure up lightning. Luke is actually able to lift the X-Wing out of the water. And in George Lucas's sixth film saga, the Force Ghosts weren't able to have that kind of interaction with the living world. You remember Obi-Wan Kenobi famously says, "I cannot interfere," when Luke was going to face Darth Vader. "You will do it alone, I can't interfere." And that was always kind of like the Lucas setup with Force Ghosts, but they can advise, and they're sort of around to guide and advise, but they can't sort of interact with the living world. But in this, Luke does actually lift the X-Wing out of the water, so Rey is able to continue on her journey. And again, that is something that I think a lot of fans wanted to see Luke do in The Last Jedi, and frustratingly he didn't do it. But in this one, yes, the X-Wing comes out of the water and they reprise the music from The Empire Strikes Back where Yoda lifts the X-Wing out of the Dagobah swamp. So it's almost, I think it's they've actually lifted the music from The Empire Strikes Back and placed into that scene. I don't think it's a new recording from John Williams. I don't think it's a new version. I think they have just lifted the music from one film to another. They do that quite a bit, actually, with The Rise of Skywalker. I'll talk a little bit more about music later on. But by and large, Luke's character is fixed. And many of the other problems that there was with The Rise of Skywalker, they sort of get round them, or they park them, or they ignore them, or in some cases they, just sort of totally discard what happened. So another thing that fans were very unhappy about was Rey being a nobody, having no role in the story, having no backstory, not being related to anybody. She was told to her face in The Last Jedi that you're a nobody, you're nothing, you're not important to this story. In this one, she has a backstory. She's the granddaughter of Emperor Palpatine, of Sheev Palpatine, or Darth Sidious, Phantom Menace, however you want to think of him. She is the granddaughter of Palpatine. So again, J.J. Abrams very much goes against what Rian Johnson did with The Last Jedi. And of course, Rian Johnson was going against what J.J. Abrams set up with The Force Awakens. So this is an odd trilogy where the films are really fighting with one another and at odds with one another, and that makes a very uneven trilogy. As a trilogy, as a three-part trilogy of films, the story doesn't work. So you have to look, I think you have to look at each film individually as a standalone, to be honest, because as a trilogy, it is just such a mess that these films do not work with one another as a three-part trilogy of movies. Certainly they don't work like the original trilogy did, or indeed the prequel trilogy. Again, that worked very much as a three-part trilogy of films, but these don't work at all. And if anything, I would say that Rise of Skywalker is probably more like a sequel to The Force Awakens, and The Last Jedi is kind of sort of ignored, really, as best they can. Some characters do suffer that, so Rose Tico is barely in The Rise of Skywalker, which I think is a little bit unfair. Kelly Marie Tran could have been given a slightly bigger role in this one, but again, I think J.J. Abrams just wanted to kind of, as best he could, forget, get the audience to forget what happened in The Last Jedi. So I can understand why he did it, but it was a little bit unfair, I think, what they did to Rose Tico and to Kelly Marie Tran. So that's very much a positive, that they are moving away from The Last Jedi. They're fixing a lot of what went wrong in The Last Jedi and discarding some of those story elements that Rian Johnson placed for us. Other good things about The Rise of Skywalker. So again, production's very, very good on this film, as you would expect. It's a high budget movie, so the special effects are excellent, the sound effects are excellent. You can see they've spent a lot of money on the film, bringing it to the big screen, and so that is all very, very good. The special effects are good, the production value is good, all of that is great. The sound effects are very good, not quite to Ben Burt standards on the originals and also on the prequels, but the sound effects, they're Star Wars. So Star Wars is primarily a story told through visual effects, through sound effects, and through music, which is something that George Lucas has had throughout his six-part saga. They have continued that with the sound effects, certainly, on the sequel trilogy. So the sound effects are just very high quality, as is the special effects, as is the production value. The music is, again, problematical, as it has been throughout the sequel trilogy. John Williams has created the score for The Rise of Skywalker, but they lift a lot of the music, or a lot of pieces of music from other films. And sometimes that is a slight reprise, I think. So sometimes it's a fresh recording that John Williams has done. a lot of the time they have just directly lifted the piece from one film and they're plonking it into this film. And as I said, a great example of that is when Luke raises the X-Wing out of water, which is a good moment, actually. It's well done, but the music is a bit distracting because you can tell that it's identical to the music from The Empire Strikes Back when Yoda does it. And there's quite a bit of that in the film. Sometimes the reprises of the music don't actually have much to do with the characters that are on screen. So we hear Princess Leia's theme quite a lot through this film. Sometimes it's good when you hear it because it's tied in with something that Leia is doing on the screen, but some of the times actually Leia isn't on the screen. There doesn't seem to be any particular reason to be using that piece of music. They just wanted something that's quite a powerful piece for a certain scene, and they use that piece of music. But it would have been better if they could have recorded a fresh piece of music that would have the same impact. We have to understand that John Williams is at a very grand age now, so he's not all that far from 90. I think he's 87, probably going to be 88 in 2020. So he's at a very grand age, and scoring a full 2 hour 20-minute film is going to be very difficult for him, I would imagine. But I don't actually think that's a problem. I think if he had proper direction from, say, George Lucas doing this, I think he would still be able to rise to the occasion. I think it's purely, or mostly anyway, down to the fact that J.J. Abrams, and also it was true for Rian Johnson, they don't understand how to give John Williams the kind of guidance that Lucas gave him. Lucas knew in every scene where he had music what he wanted that music to do, and he was always very keen to try and have new pieces of music within his films. Yes, he did bring back old themes as well, but usually, most of the time, they were reprises. They were sort of updated versions of familiar themes, if you like. So, for example, with Duel of the Fates from the Phantom Menace, that's brought back for Revenge of the Sith, but I'm pretty sure that they recorded that again when they're doing the soundtrack for Revenge of the Sith. It's just a very slightly different sort of version, I think, that they have for the Rise of Skywalker. Anyway, the upshot is the score is not up to Star Wars standards, really. So the new pieces that are there, most of them are quite forgettable. A lot of the music is just sort of background filler type music, forgettable music that is accompanying action sequences. The memorable musical moments are the ones that are taken from past films primarily. There's one or two interesting pieces of music in there that I do, but overall the score is not particularly great, as it hasn't been throughout this sequel trilogy. So, also good points. We've got Billy D. Williams back as Lando Calrissian. So he's quite good. He's 80 now as well. But he's pretty good in his role. He has quite a limited role, but when he does appear, he has a bit of gravitas about him and helps to give the film a little bit of gravitas as well. So Billy D as Lando, yes, very good. Also, C-3PO has a much bigger role in this one than he's had for most of the films, actually. Not only the sequels, but also the prequels as well. He didn't have much of a role in the prequels. I would say this is probably his biggest role that he's had in a Star Wars film since the original Star Wars, A New Hope. Maybe since Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi. But he certainly plays a very important role in this one, C-3PO. And Anthony Daniels, of course, he knows his character so well. So he does the performance very well in this. And C-3PO as a character is quite good, actually, in this one. A lot of the time with C-3PO, but potentially C-3PO, I think the reason a lot of directors sort of pull back from him a little bit is that he can be a little bit over the top. He can be a little bit in your face. So I think J.J. Abrams actually gets it just right with C-3PO. in this one. It's probably 3PO's best performance in a Star Wars film since the original Star Wars, and I was quite pleased that they give him an expanded role, and that he is relatively sensible. He's not too annoying in it either. Yes, I think C-3PO comes out of this as a pretty decent character. Overall, the acting is quite good, as it has been throughout the sequel trilogy. There is one performance that I am a bit dubious about, more about that in a moment. But overall, the acting is fine, and the dialogue is much better in this one as well. So we had all of that sort of trash talk in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, kind of like the back and forth banter, sort of trash type talk, Joss Whedon type talk, but was very out of place in Star Wars, didn't fit Star Wars at all. And this one, they pull back from that a lot. There's one scene between Rey, Finn, and Poe where there is still a little bit of that. But overall, they do pull away from that a lot. And so the dialogue is much more what you would expect in a Star Wars film. And it feels like Star Wars. To me, The Force Awakens and especially The Last Jedi did not really feel like they were Star Wars films. This one does feel like it's a Star Wars film. So that's why I say it's probably the best of the sequel trilogy. And at this point, you probably think it sounds like I really like the film. It does have its good points, but it also has many, many problems. And one of the problems is the pacing of the film. So the reason I think that they pull back from the trash talk and the banter dialogue that was so out of place in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, but they just don't have the time to do it. And I doubt it was a conscious decision that they were going to pull back from that sort of Joss Whedon dialogue. I doubt anybody actually sat down and said, let's not do that. I think it's just purely the fact they didn't have the time to do it, because this is such a fast-paced film, and that is one of the problems that you have actually with Rise of Skywalker. So although it prevented us from having to put up with that horrible dialogue that we have in the previous two films that didn't suit Star Wars at all, it also is a negative because it's so fast-paced, this, that you just have no time really to consider what you're seeing. You just go from one thing to another thing, 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 another thing, slight pause, then another thing, another thing, another thing, another thing, another thing. Action sequence, action sequence, action sequence, action sequence, slight pause. Action sequence, another thing, another thing, another thing, another thing. And so it goes along, and you just really have no time to digest what you're seeing. You don't get any of those moments of quiet moments of reflection to sort of sit back in your cinema seat and take a deep breath and just a few quiet moments to consider what's happened before you go on. And that's something that you always got in George Lucas Star Wars, those quiet moments of reflection. Sometimes they could be a little bit dull. In George Lucas's story, sometimes they could be pieces of art. Thinking of the rumination scene between Anakin and Padme in the middle of Revenge of the Sith. That was such an extraordinarily powerful moment to me. But it's actually, and it's just a quiet moment, there's nothing much happening, just two people looking out of the window and John Williams' music in the background. But that, to me, was one of the most powerful moments of the whole of the Star Wars saga. There's nothing like that at all in The Rise of Skywalker. There's none of those moments of reflection, none of those moments to pause and consider what's happening, consider the ramifications of what's going on. It's just a continuous, constant bombardment on your senses of action sequences and information, and more action sequences and more information and more action sequences and more information. And the third and final act gets extremely over the top, and it almost becomes quite comical. Actually, there's a moment where the Emperor is shooting, because say the Emperor is back. In this, of course, Palpatine returns. There's a moment where the Emperor is shooting lightning into space, and I actually burst out laughing because it is such a high moment of camp, over the top sort of Just very, very camp, very, very over the top moment. And Ian McDiarmid is usually very good in anything that he does, actually, not just Star Wars. He's a terrific, fantastic Shakespearean actor. He usually adds a huge amount of gravitas to Star Wars, and it's just really amazing that Star Wars has had Ian McDiarmid as Palpatine and as the Emperor and as Darth Sidious in the opus. But in this one, he does feel a little bit off, I have to say. I think a lot of it is that Palpatine is sort of obscured through most of it, so we very rarely get to actually see him properly. It's all very darkly lit. His scenes are very darkly lit. He's sort of covered up in robes, so that makes it very difficult to see him. His Palpatine is wired up to a machine that's keeping him alive as well, so he's limited in the way he can move. And all of this, I think, culminates in Ian McDiarmid not really being sure and confident in his performance, actually, which is a little bit, can't really believe what I'm saying that. It's a little bit shocking when I'm saying that. But I think Ian, and especially when it gets to the final confrontation between Palpatine and Rey, I think Ian was very unsure how to play that, whether he should play it as a comedy scene, because it is very comical. And as I said, burst out laughing at one point in it. So I don't think he's sure whether he should play it seriously, play it heartfelt, or whether he should play it as a farce. And it does sort of descend into farce. Now, if you sit back and just enjoy it for what it is, take it for what it is, then it could be enjoyable. But if you are a proper Star Wars fan, as I am, then the fact that it becomes comical also becomes a little bit tragic, because it feels like they are almost taking Star Wars fans for fools by what they're doing. And there's been a lot of that throughout the sequel trilogy, that it feels like we're being taken for fools, but they're laughing at us in a lot of ways. And that scene with Rey and Palpatine does descend into farce, and I don't think Ian was terribly sure how he should play it. It doesn't come off very well at all, unless you just sort of take all your preconceptions away and just take it as nonsense. And if you can do that, then it is actually probably quite a fun scene, but it is very, very over the top. The final act of the film is very, very over the top. In terms of environment, so again, they're very dull. There's not much to go at. It's just as it has been with Disney's Star Wars films. So we've got jungle planets, we've got ice and snow planets, we've got deserts, but nothing that we haven't seen before and seen done better, if you see what I mean. There is one quite interesting visual sequence, which is on the moon, one of the moons of Endor, when we go into an oceanic type setup, when Rey's got to get to the ruins of the second Death Star, and she has to go through an oceanic environment. And there's a lightsaber fight within this oceanic environment between Rey and Kylo Ren, and that's quite interesting. It's quite visually stimulating. But other than that, it's just as it has been really with Disney Star Wars, which is very, very dull environments, nothing that we haven't seen done before, and done much better as well. So if you expect to see something new and original, you're going to be quite disappointed again, unfortunately. There's very little within this that we haven't seen before. And some of it gets a bit confusing because everything looks so similar. It can be very difficult to know which planet you're on, where you are. If you see what I mean. And that's something that we had, of course, particularly in The Force Awakens, that got quite confusing to work out where we was, because all of the environments seem to be very similar. The film actually starts off on Mustafar, so they do go to one of the prequel trilogy planets, can you believe? They pretty much ignore the prequels throughout this sequel trilogy, but they do go to Mustafar at the beginning of The Rise of Skywalker, there's an establishing shot that does look very much like Mustafar, but when we actually get to the surface and we see Kylo Ren and the Knights of Ren on Mustafar, it doesn't look anything like what we've seen before, and you really wouldn't know that you was on Mustafar unless you noticed the establishing shot of the planet from space, because when we're actually there with Kylo Ren, it doesn't look at all like Mustafar. There's no volcanoes, there's no lava. So very bizarre that they would do that. But again, we know that J.J. Abrams hates the prequels. I think it's fair to say he hates the prequels. Disney has generally tried to ignore the prequels as best they can. And so even if they go to a prequel planet, they don't at all advertise the fact that you are on a planet that featured in the prequel trilogy. So why bother starting the film on Mustafar if you're not going to show that you're on Mustafar? It doesn't make much sense to me. But then there's that sense as well with Palpatine. They brought Palpatine back. But most of the time he's obscured by darkness and by shadows, by strobe lighting, by clothing. So it's like they brought him back, but they don't really want anybody to see that he's back, if you see what I mean. It's very, very strange, and there are several things within The Rise of Skywalker that are very strange, primarily relating to the return of Palpatine, and that's my big problem with The Rise of Skywalker, the reason I didn't like the film overall, because the return of Palpatine, as I said in yesterday's preliminary video, does upset what happened in the original trilogy. It very much goes against the end of Return of the Jedi. There being the Chosen One, the prophecy of the Chosen One, Anakin being the Chosen One, created by the Force to get rid of the Sith and evil and to bring balance to the Force. So that is all gone. Obviously, if Palpatine survived, then Anakin didn't fulfill the prophecy. And the sacrifice of Vader, Anakin, at the end of Return of the Jedi to fulfill the prophecy, he does it out of love for his son. But that sacrifice, again, is pretty much discarded. That's thrown in the bin as well. And for what we get from The Rise of Skywalker versus what we lose in George Lucas's 6-part opus, I don't think it's worth it. I just do not think this sequel trilogy has been worth it. I don't think the people that are making these films understand what George Lucas has established. I don't think they understand the Force. I don't think they understand the Sith. Again, there's a story arc within this prequel trilogy where the Jedi accept death, the Jedi accept the inevitability of death, and the Sith don't. So the Sith are seeking immortality, the Jedi accept the inevitability of death, and by doing so they are able to live in the afterlife, whereas the Sith are looking for immortality, but when they die they will not be able to become ghosts. Presumably they would just die and that would be the end of them. In this we do see, so this is a big spoiler, we see Rey die at the end of The Rise of Skywalker. So Rey dies after her confrontation with Palpatine, after she defeats Palpatine. She kills her grandfather finally. So it's no longer Anakin, Darth Vader, who kills Palpatine and gets rid of the Sith. It's actually Rey who does it. So that's why I say they've discarded the whole story arc of the Chosen One and Anakin's sacrifice and redemption at the end of Return of the Jedi is for nothing, because now Rey is the one that's doing that job in that role. But to do that, she dies, and Kylo Ren has become Ben Solo by this point. He's turned back to the good side. And so at the point where she dies, as George Lucas has established Star Wars, at that point, Ben Solo should really, as a Jedi, presumably he's back as a Jedi, if he's turned to the good side, at that point he should really accept that she's gone, and sort of embrace the fact that she has passed into the netherworld of the Force. What he actually does is brings her back to life. So the Jedi in this can bring back people from death. They are able to do that. which of course is something that started Anakin's fall to the dark side. Anakin was unable to accept death, so his mother dies, and in Attack of the Clones, and after that he's looking to be able to bring people back from death and stop his wife Padme from dying, and that in George Lucas's Star Wars saga is an evil thing to do. It's a greedy thing to do, to want to hang on to Padme and hang on to loved ones and not accept that their progress through life is inevitably going to end in their death. But that's George Lucas's Star Wars saga, that the Jedi should accept death. In this one, Ben Solo brings Rey back from death. He dies doing that. But it feels terribly, terribly muddled, really, this film. It feels like they don't understand the way the Jedi and the Sith should be behaving. They don't understand life and death as it's been established within George Lucas's saga, and it was very, very notable to me, but it feels really confusing if you was to watch Revenge of the Sith and then you was to watch The Rise of Skywalker. It will feel like the two films are pulling themselves apart in their overall story arcs. The Jedi are also healers now, so they can lay on the hands like a faith healer and cure the sick, and so that creates problems. Why didn't Obi-Wan Kenobi heal Qui-Gon at the end of The Phantom Menace? Why didn't Luke heal himself when he had his arm cut off at the end of The Empire Strikes Back? We could go on with this. Why didn't Obi-Wan heal Anakin when he had his hand cut off at the hands of Count Dooku at the end of Attack of the Clones? And, you know, we could carry on with this. Maybe Luke could have healed his father and he needn't have died at the end of Return of the Jedi. So that creates all sorts of problems. The fact that the Jedi are apparently sort of faith healers now. And it just feels like these people who are making these sequel trilogy films have no understanding really of Star Wars lore, of what's been established in terms of the Jedi and the Sith. They just have no understanding of what the Force can do and what it can't do. And of course, that is where you miss George Lucas. That's probably why they pushed George out of the door, because he would have stopped a lot of this because of the impact that he would have on the films that he has created. But there we go, they pushed him out the door, and so they can do whatever they like with the Jedi and the Sith, but a lot of it makes no sense. And so that's the reason, primarily, that I'm negative about The Rise of Skywalker, because it's still, as has been The Force Awakens and as has been The Last Jedi, it is still going against the established lore. They are making up the films as they're going along. They're giving no thought to how the Jedi, the Sith behave, how, those big sort of themes of life and death and fathers and sons and now grandchildren, how they should be presented. They're not giving any thought to it. And so I can't be anything other than critical of The Rise of Skywalker, I'm afraid. Even though it is an improvement for the sequel trilogy, it's very, very damaging, I have to say, particularly to The Return of the Jedi. It's very, very damaging to the end of that film. And maybe there was no way of doing a sequel trilogy without being damaging to Return of the Jedi and to what has already been established. Who knows whether they could have done this in a way that didn't damage the films that had gone before. But this one is very, very, very damaging to Return of the Jedi in particular. So what else I'm going to tell you? So I think that's pretty much it. Carrie Fisher is in The Rise of Skywalker. Her role is quite small, but when she's in it, actually it does work. I was a bit surprised. I'm quite dubious about using sort of deleted scenes from The Force Awakens and inserting them into Rise of Skywalker in a different context, having other actors sort of acting around those scenes. I didn't think it would work, but it does work quite well, actually. So it's nice to see her, and she gets a death in this. Leia does die, but it's handled so much better than the sort of miserable death that Rian Johnson gave to Luke. I mean, Luke's death was very, very miserable. He was alone on that horrible island that he never got the chance to leave, and he just died a lonely, solitary, very, very miserable death, whereas Leia gets a very, very nice death. J.J. Abrams does give her a very nice death, and Chewie's reaction to her death is very moving as well, and I think the reaction that you see from Chewie when he hears from Chewbacca, when he hears that Leia has died, I think many Star Wars fans felt like that when we heard what had happened to Carrie 3 years ago. So that was a very nice moment, actually, the reaction of Chewie to Leia's death. Of course, nobody is around to react to Luke's death. His death was just absolutely horrible, but then the whole of The Last Jedi was absolutely horrible as well, to be honest. So that works quite nicely. Harrison Ford, again, this big spoiler, Harrison Ford appears for one scene, so that makes very little sense. It's the scene that brings Kylo Ren back to being Ben Solo. He returns to the light in this scene with Han. But again, it makes very little sense about what's going on. Is Han back as some sort of ghost? Is it... it's just after Leia has died, so is Leia conjuring up this vision of Han? Has Leia brought Han back from the afterlife? It's a very confusing moment. Are they implying that Han had some sort of force ability and is able to come back? Or is Ben Solo has been taking hallucinogenic drugs and he's sort of conjured up this image? It is a very confusing moment, and it would have been much better if they'd used either Luke, or maybe they could have used Anakin. We do hear Anakin and other Force ghosts at the end of The Rise of Skywalker, so we hear Anakin's voice in the form of Hayden Christensen. So they did use Hayden Christensen in this film, but only as a voice. I think it could have worked quite a bit better if they'd actually used Hayden Christensen's form as Anakin and had him present himself to Ben Solo and bring him back to the light in that scene. I think that would have made a lot more sense for using Han. It's nice to see Harrison Ford, but Han just doesn't have that ability. Or, as far as we know, he's never had that ability. So it is quite silly and quite strange, albeit it's quite nice to see Harrison back. But I think it could have been done better if they'd used Luke, or even if they'd used Anakin. And it's quite disappointing in the last scene of the film, which is where Rey goes back to Tatooine. We finish the film where we start the saga. So we finish the saga, we start the saga on Tatooine at the homestead, and Rey goes back there. And the final scene is where she says she's Rey Skywalker. So she takes the Skywalker name, although she's actually Rey Palpatine. And that's something that's quite strange about this sequel trilogy now. And I suppose the whole of Star Wars saga, really, that this has now moved from being the story of the Skywalkers to the story of the Palpatines. It's the Skywalkers are all dead at the end of this film. Yes, Ben Solo also dies. So there's no Skywalkers left. All we have left is a Palpatine who takes the Skywalker name. And it has become, Star Wars has become, and I doubt they planned this when they started the sequel trilogy, but I think this is just the way that through various missteps and mistakes and accidents and problems that we've had through this sequel trilogy, I think it's just how it's ended up more than anything. But I doubt they planned it at the start, that this is now the story of the Palpatines and not the story of the Skywalkers, which is another reason that I can't rate this film highly at all, because I don't think anybody, certainly not George Lucas, and I doubt even Kathleen Kennedy, J.J. Abrams or Rian Johnson, ever, when they started this project, had the idea that Star Wars would actually be the story of the Palpatines. I just don't believe that that was planned. I don't believe Rey was planned to be Palpatine's granddaughter. When they did The Force Awakens, I don't believe they ever planned to bring Palpatine back, when they started this sequel trilogy. So, again, it's just another reason why I can't rate The Rise of Skywalker highly, because it's so problematical what's happened, and the way the story's sort of been turned on its head and gone to a place where nobody at the outset would have thought that's where it's going to go, and would have planned for it to go there. But anyway, Rey goes back to the homestead. She takes the Skywalker name, so she says that she's Rey Skywalker, and we see one final shot of Luke and Leia as Force ghosts. I think with that, they really should have added Hayden Christensen as Anakin. As I know J.J. Abrams hates the prequel trilogy and wants to forget it as much as he can, but it never happened. But you have got to take into account that Anakin is a very, very important player within the Star Wars story, and he should have been there. He should have been there as a Force ghost with Luke and Leia. He probably should have added Ben Solo as well, to be honest. But they didn't. All you get is Luke and Leia, and I think that was a very disappointing. That's very disappointing that you only get Luke and Leia, and not the grandfather and not the grandson too. I think that's pretty much everything I'm going to tell you. So out of, as I said yesterday, out of 5, I would rate it as a 2. So that's negative. Out of 10, I would rate it as a 4. That's negative. It's a slight improvement overall for the sequel trilogy. It is the best of the sequels, but I am very negative about it, really. I didn't enjoy it particularly, and I wasn't expecting to, though. This sequel trilogy has been a mess. The films are at odds with one another. It's not a coherent trilogy, and that's down to the failures of the directors who have been making the films. Abrams and Johnson, also Kathleen Kennedy, has failed to do her job as an overseer. There's very little that I was expecting out of this film, and I wasn't disappointed. I wasn't going into it with high expectations and came away disappointed. I got exactly what I expected, which is basically a very poor film with a few good pieces within it. And I wasn't expecting any more than that, so at least I wasn't disappointed. Right, well, that's it for this full review of The Rise of Skywalker. Please let me know what you think in the comments. I'm sure there are things here that I've forgotten, so I may do a follow-up about those things. But I think that pretty much covers all of the points for The Rise of Skywalker. So please let me know what you think in the comments. Did you enjoy Rise of Skywalker? Do you hate Rise of Skywalker? What do you think to the sequel trilogy overall now that the thing is complete? Is it a mess? Is it a train wreck, as I think it is? Let me know what you think in the comments. Please like, share, and subscribe. And we'll be back with more Star Wars content very, very soon. That's all for now, though, and thanks for watching.